Hello viewers, and welcome to another special video production by Cardboard of the Rings, a bi-weekly podcast about the Lord of the Rings, the card game, which is a living card game by Fantasy Flight Games. This is Mitch, and joining me as always is Matthew.
Hey.
And this is yet another entry in the LOTR LCG progression series. Last episode, we went ahead and took a look at the leadership sphere of influence in the core set, went ahead and reviewed, analyzed all the different player and hero cards, and what sphere are we going to be taking a look at today, Matthew?
Well, today is my favorite sphere, which is the tactics sphere, and this sphere emphasizes a hero's martial prowess, particularly as it relates to combat and overcoming other tactical challenges that confront our heroes as they adventure through a quest.
So I think that about sums it up. Tactics to me in this game is very much specialized. So as where we talked about leadership being a very versatile, jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none sphere, tactics really hones in combat prowess. Raw attack strength, being able to benefit from actually killing and dispatching enemies. They're not nearly so good at contributing willpower to the quest or using clever, cute little tricks to overcome locations and treachery cards, but if you need to get some characters in play that can kill some Nazgul, kill some hill trolls, tactics is going to be your sphere.
Right, I agree. So why don't we just dive right in and take a look at our first hero, who happens to be Gimli. Gimli has a threat cost of 11. He has 2 willpower, 2 attack strength, 2 defense strength, and a whopping 5 hit points. He's a dwarf, a noble, and a warrior, and his game text reads that he gets +1 attack strength for each damage token on him. You guys probably know how I feel because I think I used him in every single one of the videos for our core set progression, and I think he's a solid hero. He combos great with so many cards. Citadel Plate, he's great for undefended attacks. I think he remains relevant through Khazad Dûm and perhaps even Heirs of Numenor. I think if there's any drawback, though it's one that Mitch and I could care less about, is that he's not really a score-friendly hero because you want a bunch of damage on him, so he has a much mightier attack strength. But I think he's solid. I like him a lot.
Definitely. Gimli, I would have to say, is the hero incarnation of my preferred playstyle in video games. They throw out the term glass cannon, and that's exactly what Gimli is. So he gets stronger as he takes more damage. He's by far got the highest attack capability in the game, and remains so for as long as we've seen, up to Heirs of Numenor. But he's, for tactics, kind of shockingly well-rounded hero. He's got good willpower, he's got good attack strength that only gets better, he's got good defense, and his 5 hit points means that he's great at taking undefended attacks. The very obvious combos with him are things like Dwarven Axe and Citadel Plates, but also Unexpected Courage. You can get huge use out of Gimli, because even though, as we're sure to see, tactics is pretty awful when it comes to questing, 2 willpower is nothing to sneeze at. And of course, going along with that extremely high attack strength of his, the event Quick Strike works out perfectly. So if Gimli is able to deal enough damage to kill an enemy on the table, he's probably going to be able to kill that enemy before it has the opportunity to attack. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that brings us to our next hero, whom is Legolas. So Legolas weighs in at 9 threat, 1 willpower, 3 attack, 1 defense, and 4 hit points. His traits are Noble, Sylvan, and Warrior. He has the ability Ranged, and his response is after Legolas participates in an attack that destroys an enemy, place 2 progress tokens on that current quest. And Legolas, just like Gimli, has a very high base attack value. Legolas actually trumps Gimli in that respect. And what I really like about the design of this character is, last video, you mentioned, Matthew, that for almost every hero in the game, their threat is equal to the sum of all of their attribute points. Mm-hmm. And Legolas has very little wasted stats. Like his willpower is very low, his defense is very low, because you're going to be using him to attack. Maybe he'll take an undefended attack, but he's going to be killing.
Right. Again, I used him, I think, in every one of our videos. I think he's a solid hero. Of course, he combos great with the Blade of Gondolin. As you guys all know, it happened. I think I put it on him exclusively. I think, might become slightly less relevant in Khazad-dûm, but perhaps he will see some renewed play in Heirs of Numenor as sort of attacking is sort of the new way of questing. And also his ranged ability becomes more and more useful as this game progresses. So definitely a solid hero. Like him a lot.
Sure. You mentioned Blade of Gondolin, and why I think that's a particularly good combo with Legolas is enemies on the table end up becoming like a precious resource.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to stack even more of that, if this attack destroys an enemy, gain progress tokens on one character, then he can maybe generate 4 tokens per kill. If you can dump Unexpected Courage onto him, it's really, Tactics' best hope at being able to complete a quest. I guess I can't really say mono, because you've got Unexpected Courage on the table, but it can generate some huge quest progress.
Yeah, that leads us, I think, to Thalon, which is a hero I haven't used yet in our progression series. He has a threat cost of 9, willpower of 1, attack strength of 2, defense strength of 2, and 4 hit points. He's a dwarf and a warrior, and his text reads, while Thalon is committed to the quest, deal 1 damage to each enemy as it's revealed by the encounter deck. I love his art as a sort of a side note, but I really do think he's the lesser of the 3 core set tactics heroes. He definitely doesn't mesh all that well with Legolas, but I think he might work well with Dune here. Not a bad addition to dwarf decks, certainly before we start getting a lot of dwarf heroes. I think where this hero would really excel is in a quest with swarms of tiny, low hit point enemies.
Sure. I think the thing that bothers me a little bit about Thalon is, just like I mentioned last video, there are a lot of enemies that are going to require kind of an awkward number of hit points to kill, so it can't be something so simple as, say, Thalon committed to the quest, Gondorian Spearman to defend, since we have so many 3+ hit point enemies. I really think that 1 damage is pretty useful. It insta-kills cards like Eastern Crows before they have the opportunity to surge. But really the thing that kind of bothers me with Thalon is his willpower is so extremely low for a character that you really want to consistently dedicate to questing. And he's a pretty sturdy defender, but you've kind of got to figure out what the best role is. So.
Right.
He certainly combos great with direct damage effects like Swift Strike, Longbeard Orc Slayer, Gondorian Spearman, but just by himself, unless you're playing mono tactics, he's not doing a ton.
Right. Maybe he needs a Celebrian Stone or something.
Right. And I suppose that takes us to our allies. So to kick things off, a staple for the tactics deck at this point is Veteran Axehand. It is a cost of 2 for a 0 willpower, 2 attack, 1 defense, 2 hit point, dwarf warrior. It does not have any abilities, but he's relatively sturdy. He can do a little bit of defending against moderately strong opponents. He's 2 attack strength for 2 tactics resources. Not too much else to say about him, really.
Right, I don't have much to add. I think he's a decent, cheap ally who only gets better in Khazad-dûm when there's just dwarves become a powerhouse. Next up on the list is the Gondorian Spearman. He has a cost of 2, willpower of 0, both attack and defense strength of 1, and 1 hit point. His traits are Gondor and Warrior. I bet you know what I'm going to say about those. His text, he's Sentinel, and his response, after he's declared as a defender, you deal 1 damage to the attacking enemy. I think we used him to great effect in our first 4 videos. He's an excellent blocker. Sentinel is nice. And again, who knows, he might be getting even better in the current Heirs of Numenor cycle.
Sure, I think the Gondorian Spearman is probably one of my favorite tactics allies, if not the favorite. He's kind of an opportunistic killer, so he combos very well with Thalon. I love that he has Sentinel, so naturally he can, you can basically take advantage of every opportunity to use his ability. If you declare him as a defender, he automatically deals that 1 damage that passes through any amount of defense. So if you've got a hill troll attacking and it's only got 1 single hit point left, it's easy to just declare the Gondorian Spearman as the defender and just impale that enemy before it can do you any harm. So the attack would automatically be cancelled, no damage, no shadow card to deal with, and if you combo it with say Swift Strike or Thalon, you can just really start taking on some pretty high hit point enemies before they have any hope of harming you.
Yeah.
Next on our list is the Horseback Archer at a cost of 3, 0 willpower, 2 attack, 1 defense, 2 hit points. It is a Rohan Archer, and it has the ranged keyword. So this is basically the same as the Veteran Axe Hand, and you kind of just have to ask yourself, is it worth paying the additional 1 point for Rohan and ranged? It's great if you're doing kind of the hammer and anvil strategy where you try and get all enemies to one side of the board. I suppose normally the tactics player would be the tank deck, so it'd be not the best use of the ranged characteristic in that case, but if, let's say the other player has to take something small like a crow, if they've got pretty much everybody sent off to the quest, you can pick off some pretty weak enemies, and it goes pretty well in conjunction with, say, Legolas, or if you're playing Silverlode Archers, where, you can take on slightly bigger opponents from across the table.
Right, I don't really think I have much to add. He's the Veteran Axe Hand with ranged, which has been developed a little bit more here. Recently, Rohan, again, has not. Auto-include, because Tactics only has the 4 allies in the core set, so you don't have much to choose from, but as more cards get introduced, this one becomes less and less relevant, I think. And speaking of perhaps less relevant, we have Bjorn. He has a cost of 6, a willpower of 1, attack and defense strength of 3, and a whopping 6 hit points. He has the Bjorning and the Warrior traits, I think both of which have seen no use yet in the game, and his action, Bjorn gets +5 attack strength until the end of the phase. At the end of the phase in which you trigger this effect, shuffle Bjorn back into your deck, which is limited once per round. We talked about him a little bit in the last video when we discussed the leadership event, Sneak Attack. I think he has great stats, on par with many heroes, if not better. Very expensive cost. And the ability is so-so. But I definitely think he's got a cool factor going on. He was in my decks in our first couple videos. I never got to use him or his ability, which made me sad because I was really hoping to. In fact, I don't know if I've ever used it. So I think he's definitely one of those allies, sort of like Brock Iron Fist or the Orc Slayer, that I think are super cool. You just don't see them played very often.
Right. I think in Magic they call this basically a win more card,
right,
where you've already got to have things going pretty well for you to see Bjorn hit the table. Obviously, his stats are ridiculously high. 6 hit points with the 3 defense makes him an absolutely stellar defender. Once he gets sufficiently damaged, you can say, okay, he's practically dead. I'm going to go ahead and throw him away to tear 8 attack strength into one huge opponent, say the 1 hill troll you have to kill, the 1 Nazgul of Dol Guldur. But really, it just seems, especially with tactics, you've got to kind of consistently generate a steady stream of allies, use events relatively consistently, so 6 resources is just such a tall order.
Yeah.
But, be that as it may, he certainly can be used to immense use if you do manage to get him into play. So, just like Matthew said, there are only those 4 different tactics allies to choose from, and that leads us into our attachments. The first of which is Blade of Gondolin. With a cost of 1, it is an item, a weapon, and you attach it to a hero, it is restricted. Attached hero gets +1 attack strength, specifically when attacking an orc. And response, after attached hero attacks and destroys an enemy, place 1 progress token on the current quest. So it combos, of course, great with Legolas. As you've seen, Tactics really has next to nothing to offer in regard to strong questing allies, so this is really one of their only means of trying to contribute to the quest. It can certainly help to power down strong active locations like the East Bite weighing in with its 6 progress tokens. So Blade of Gondolin by itself is a pretty marginal effect, but it's a small attack boost, it's a small questing boost, and the price is right for 1.
Right. I'm a fan of all 4 of the tactics attachments, which should probably be no surprise. I think it's a solid card. It's going to be great in orc-heavy quests. It'll give Legolas an attack strength of 4. Of course, if that's attached to him, which it probably always should be. I think it's a great card.
Really, the only other thing I want to say about Blade of Gondolin is it is one of the only ways to increase attack strength. So we've got 4 Gondor, we've got, the upcoming Dwarven Axe. But for a character like Dune here, where his gimmick is attacking the staging area, he's only got 3 attack value. If you're able to put a couple of these on him, he's a hell of a lot more useful if he can do, say, 5 against maybe a Dol Guldur Beastmaster or Chieftain Uftak. And I think that probably covers this attachment.
Absolutely. Citadel Plate is up next. It's got a hefty cost of 4. It's an item and armor, and it can only be attached to a hero, and it's restricted. However, the attached hero gets +4 hit points. I think in our most recent quest, the Escape from Dol Guldur, this came in quite handy. I was able to get 2 on Gimli, and I was able to eat up that nasty Hummerhorn's 5 damage, and Gimli was just a beast. The cost certainly sort of sucks, but I think it's a great card. There's heroes in the Heirs of Numenor box set that makes paying for weapons or armors less expensive, sort of makes them some uber defenders. I think it's just a great attachment.
Yeah, I think the one problem with this is 4 resources similar to Bjorn can be a pretty steep order. Restricted is a little bit prohibitive, like if you've already got Blades of Gondolin or, say, Dwarven Axes sitting on your characters. Really, all the tactics attachments are restricted, so that can be a little bit of a problem, but again, since you've only got so few cards, by including a lot of these in your deck, it increases the odds of you drawing one of them, so I think it works out really well. Naturally, it's really great on Gimli, where you can boost him up to, I think in that video, he was up to a pool of 13 hit points, but it works fantastically with Glowin in the leadership sphere as well. So not just Gimli, but his dad as well. And of course, if you've got Self-Preservation, Daughter of the Nimrodel, some ability to, gradually heal these characters, a higher pool of hit points means that they're far less likely to die from surprisingly high attacks with shadow effects and whatnot. So you really can't go wrong with Citadel Plate.
Right.
And up next, of course, is Dwarven Axe. At a cost of 2, it is an item and weapon, and familiar by now, attached to a hero, restricted. Attached hero gains +1 attack, +2 attack strength instead if attached hero is a dwarf. So this is, of course, best on Gimli or Glowin. This was basically the card I was referring to when Citadel Plate's restricted becomes a problem. So if Gimli already has a couple Dwarven Axes, the Citadel Plate is going to have to, require one of those to be discarded. But it's a huge attack boost. It boosts any character, like Dune here I mentioned earlier, so it's always effective. For non-dwarf characters, it's maybe a little bit expensive, but it's even good on Thalin.
Right, I don't have much to add. We get more in the way of weapons in later cycles, but for the core set, great card. Last but not least, we have the Horn of Gondor with a cost of 1. It's an item and an artifact. It can only attach to a hero, and it is also restricted. Its response reads, after a character leaves play, add 1 resource to the attached hero's pool. Again, I was playing Tactics in all of our 4 attempts at the 3 core set quests. This card is one that perhaps I'm more ambivalent toward than the others, only because of it's sort of situational. It's a great effect, it's a very cheap cost, but we didn't always have allies leaving play. It is a good way to smooth out resources, again, resource generation, I should say, if you can have allies leaving play. It's also unique, unlike some of the other attachments in the tactic sphere. I like it. I'm not trying. I feel like I'm sort of harder on it than I want to be, but it just didn't get, I think, the bang for its buck all that often, at least in the videos we've done thus far.
Yeah, I think compared to something like Steward of Gondor, which is a really steady, high stream of resources, Horn of Gondor might have some power turns and it might not. In the Escape from Dol Guldur video, we only lost a single ally, to the best of my knowledge. so sometimes you're not really going to see much of an effect. I do like that it triggers globally, so say in a 4-player game, if players are sneak attacking, if they're playing a lot of chump blockers, things like that, you can really see a lot of huge gain from this character, from this card, but it does require characters leaving play, and sometimes it's not going to quite work out like you want it to.
Yeah.
So now that we've covered attachments, the last thing left to cover are the tactics events, and we start off with Blade Mastery. So at a cost of 1, it's action. Choose a character. Until the end of the phase, that character gains +1 attack and +1 defense. Something that Matthew and I kind of talk about in between videos is we almost feel a little bit bad for having kind of a universally positive acclaim for all of these cards, and a really, nothing bad to say about any of them, but Blade Mastery is kind of a marginally effective card, in my opinion. It can make all the difference between saving a character or killing a big, powerful enemy. It does affect both by default, but it's a really wimpy effect. It takes up a card, it still costs a resource, where I'd much rather save up for something like Feint or Quick Strike. I guess, do you have any additional thoughts on it?
I think because it's giving it to the same character, unlike for Gondor, which gives it to a whole bunch of people, in fact, all characters in play, I think maybe this would be most useful on a character that has unexpected courage, so they could defend at +1 and then attack at +1. Maybe it'll see, I feel like I'm a broken record here, but increase play in Heirs of Numenor only because with those siege and battle keywords, we're now questing with our attack or our defense strength, that this could perhaps be a little more helpful, but it's only one character. Basically, I think it has limited value.
Yeah, I do think that Gimli, you can see a pretty decent effect on it, just because he benefits from the defense bonus, he benefits from the attack bonus, presuming that you've got unexpected courage to ready him, or some other effect like that, maybe Common Cause, but it just seems like whenever I would draw this card, it would be kind of a little bit of a letdown, so...
Yeah. And speaking of letdowns, as much as I don't want to be harsh on the cards here, although, I'll be harsh if it's warranted. Rain of Arrows. It has a cost of 1, and its action reads, exhaust a character you control with the ranged keyword to choose one player. Deal 1 damage to each enemy engaged with that player. I think while ranged is getting more and more love as the game progresses, I still think that this card has limited usefulness. I hate that you have to exhaust a character for this to work. In this case, it'd probably be Legolas, or one of the allies with range. But I'm not sure it's worth it. Maybe, if you've got Fallon that was already wounding things as they came off the encounter deck, and this could maybe bump it over a little bit. I don't think I included this card in any of my decks so far in our progression series. I don't particularly see myself including it in any decks, at least in the near future. Not my tactics has some really strong events. To me, this isn't one.
Yeah. Theoretically, it's a direct damage effect. Maybe it'll save a player here and there from having to defend. The big problem with this is 1 damage is a really marginal effect, and it's specifically with enemies engaged with a player, so it doesn't affect anyone in the staging area. Ideally, someone is swamped with enemies, and that's just kind of difficult for people to deal with, but it does only affect 1 player. You're either exhausting Legolas, the Horseback Archer, or Silverload Archer to use this card. It's either a hero whom, you could benefit from attacking and getting some quest progress tokens put on a location or the quest. So you're using either an expensive ally or that hero, and it's just 1 damage to all the enemies with 1 player, so it's probably pretty unlikely that you're going to be able to kill anything with this effect. It's also probably pretty unlikely that you'll be able to have multiple ranged characters in play to use multiple Rain of Arrows, even in conjunction with other direct damage effects. So this is just really kind of the bottom of the barrel in regard to tactics events, and if there's, any card to take out of your deck, sadly, Rain of Arrows is probably that card.
Yeah.
But, of course, since they can't all be winners, getting back to one of the probably more powerful tactics cards is something called Feint. So at a cost of 1, it is a combat action to choose an enemy engaged with a player, and that enemy cannot attack this phase. So what I like about this card is it's very cheap. It makes sure that there's no shadow effect that can go off and cause some sort of ruinous effect, like an undefended attack, meaning a dead hero, something like that. It prevents expensive allies from having to defend and maybe being killed. It's spectacular against big, beefy opponents like the Hill Troll or the Nazgul of Dal Guldur. Really, the only problem with this is it's a one-time effect, but definitely an event in your hand in most cases is a lot safer than an ally sitting on the table.
Yeah, I have really nothing to add other than that. I think it remains one of the strongest tactics events to this day.
For sure. And another one of those strongest tactics events, why don't you tell us about Quick Strike?
Right, it's also a cost of 1, and its action reads, exhaust a character you control to immediately declare it as an attacker and resolve its attack against any eligible enemy target. I think it's a solid event. It can eliminate the need to defend if you are able to immediately kill an enemy. It could allow you to increase the number, I think, of committed characters to a later attack that maybe would have been used to defend or something against an enemy. I don't know if we used it in the progression series videos. I can't recall if this was ever used. It was in my decks, but I don't know if I ever found a place to use it. I think it's a great card. I like Feint a whole lot better than this one, but this one's certainly pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think the big contingency for this one is it is completely contingent upon whether or not you have sufficient attack strength to actually kill the enemy that's attacking you. So if a Hill Troll is bearing down on you and you can have Gimli with a couple Citadel plates, swing and just knock it out of the ballpark, that's perfect. But if you've only got, say, Legolas with 3 or 4 attack strength, maybe it's not going to be enough to have Quick Strike do anything. So it's definitely a little bit more situational than something like Feint. It does work great with Gimli. Sometimes you can use it in conjunction with things like Gondorian Spearmen or other direct damage effects to weaken opponents and then finish them off, but definitely if you're playing Gimli, I would say Quick Strike is an auto-include.
Right.
And then one of our last events here is Thicket of Spears, which is very situational. So this is going to be 3 resources, and you have to use the resources from 3 different heroes' resource pools in order to play for this card, which is really the only time we've seen this, I think up until Heirs of Numenor. And it reads, action, choose a player. That player's engaged enemies do not attack this phase. So it's obviously got an extremely strong effect. It's like a feint that takes place on an infinite amount of enemies for whichever player you choose. So it locks a player down for locks, your personal staging area down for an entire turn. But the only problem with this is you really have to be playing mono tactics, and the way we're doing 2-player games, it's probably a little bit less than ideal.
Right. I don't think it was a card that was ever in my decks because I didn't ever have 3 tactics heroes. Once we get into the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, where we have songs that will allow individual heroes to belong to multiple spheres, for all intents and purposes, this might become a more important card. And to say my popular refrain, now that tactics has become more important in the Heirs of Numenor cycle, this might be a card where having 3 tactics heroes isn't unheard of. In fact, might be helpful to attempting these battle-heavy quests. And so this is a fantastic ability, though one that I haven't used. But, if you're going to use 3 tactics heroes, or, again, using the Song of Battle that comes out in the Shadow of Mirkwood cycle, I think this is a pretty darn good card.
Sure, I think it's definitely extremely powerful. It's a little bit tricky at this point to use it if you're playing 3 or 4 player games with just the stock, monosphere decks. That's great. We'll have to see if the, monosphere gets a little bit more user-friendly as more and more products come out in this set. So
Right.
Thicket of Spears is definitely one to keep an eye on. At the present moment, it's a little bit hard to get into play, but definitely a powerful effect.
So down to our last 2 tactics events. Swift Strike has a cost of 2, and its response reads, after a character is declared as a defender, deal 2 damage to the attacking enemy. I think I did have this in a couple of my decks. I'm not sure it ever got used. I think it's less useful than Quick Strike, which I thought was less useful than Feint. Though I do think this card could perhaps combo well with Gondorian Spearman, because it would be 3 sort of insta damage, right? Gondorian Spearman does his 1. Maybe that's not enough to kill something, but if you're able to pay for this card, it's now going to do 2 damage on top of Gondorian Spearman's 1. That could be helpful. Otherwise, it's not a card. It's one of the first cards that I would cut from a tactics deck, as is.
Yeah. Just another little detriment for this card is, whereas Feint is just pick an enemy, the enemy doesn't do anything, this is you have to declare a character as a defender. So even if the character is going to be even if the enemy is going to automatically be killed, say by Swift Strike, you're still exhausting that character so that they're not maybe going to be able to contribute to another attack that round. So it's definitely all right. The cost is a little bit steep. Sometimes it's hard to leave 1 resource open, let alone 2. So it can definitely be useful. If you're playing a lot of direct damage, it can be decent. Thalon plus Swift Strike kills something like Wargs in Journey Along the Anduin, but this is, maybe a contender to keep in your deck, maybe a contender to exclude. Maybe it's just a little bit more, of a niche card as we get more and more player cards released. And then, of course, our very last tactics event, why not end with a bang? Stand Together is a cost of 0, and it reads, action, choose a player. That player may declare any number of his eligible characters as defenders against each enemy attacking him this phase. And this is one of those cards where people have raised a lot of questions as to how exactly it works. For example, if you have 2 characters defend against 1 enemy, can you distribute the damage as you see fit? Do you distribute all of the damage to 1 character? And I don't think to this day there's been an official FFG clarification. I would assume that all of the damage goes to 1 character, and their collective defense just, drains or saps that attack of some of its strengths. Ideally, this card saves your character's lives, but I think the obvious detriment to this is it also exhausts a hell of a lot of characters. So even though you can maybe stand together to weather an attack, the big question here is, are you going to be able to rally enough attack strength to, turn the game around and actually gain some forward momentum?
Right. I think that this could maybe be useful against the Hill Troll if, for some reason, you don't want your threat to go up a whole bunch. Maybe if you are the support character and your buddy's tactics or something, if he had enough range characters, he may then be able to take care of it while you end up not losing any characters. But, I have a whole bunch of what ifs, right, to sort of make this card sound better than it is. So limited usefulness. Tactics is so interesting to me in that some of their events are just so stellar, and then others are just sort of used so little in the game that it's just sort of interesting to me. And I think this is one that I have never used and probably never will, unless there's just a really niche quest that requires something like this.
Right. I think a fun little trick you can do with this is, say, having 3 Gondorian Spearmen, or
right.
Up to, I guess, you could technically, say, stand and fight someone else's Gondorian Spearmen to get a total of 6 of them to defend an attack all at once, but the likelihood of that is extraordinarily low. Might be fun once every blue moon, but
I'm
going to
try and work that into our the Hunt for Gollum.
Right, exactly.
So,
for the most part, I would say Stand Together, you can probably keep in the binder.
Just stand apart, yeah.
But I guess now that we've covered all of the tactics cards, just like for the leadership sphere, I'll go ahead and ask, Matthew, do any particular strengths or blaring weaknesses, stand out when we take a look at tactics as a whole in the core set?
Yeah, I mean, as you said at the outset of this particular mini-series, leadership is the jack of all trades. And the remaining 3 spheres really are masters at a particular thing. We'll get to what lore masters and what spirit masters in our future videos, but tactics is obviously all about attack and all about defending. Definitely my favorite sphere. This is just sort of my play style on a whole bunch of games. I like the simple, no frills, no thinking man's, oh, let me come up with this funky 10-card combo that breaks the game. I don't like to play that way. I just like to bash some enemies and have a good time doing so. So this is definitely the sphere for me.
Sure. I think really the only thing for me is just making sure that people keep in mind that tactics is just so specialized, especially if you move away from using Legolas and Blades of Gondolin, you're really not contributing much of anything to the quest, so sometimes it can be really easy to go overboard, like a mono tactics deck is just so focused. I think it would be super easy to just lose to a lot of treacheries and locations and things like that, so yeah. It's always good to strike a balance, and that's really it. Sometimes I just feel like tactics can go a little bit overboard with just how much colossal amounts of attack they can bring to bear against the core set's relatively weak allotment of enemies.
Right. I remember when I first got the game, I think probably tactics was the first sphere I tried, and was very sad that I could not get very far with tactics on its own.
Yeah, mine would have been leadership, but yes, a lot of players complaining back in the day that the mono tactics deck would just get torn apart by our 3 scenarios here.
Yeah.
But any closing thoughts, Matthew?
No, my favorite sphere is now over and done with, and we'll get to spirit and lore, and I'm looking forward to that.
Right. So you heard it here first. Everything else is all downhill from here. So
I tried to be a little more diplomatic, but yeah, pretty much.
All right. Well, as always, thank you guys very much for watching yet another entry in this series. Be sure to like this video or subscribe to our channel if you liked what you saw. Feel free to leave us some feedback, either constructive criticism or destructive criticism in the comments below. If you think we've been a little bit unfair with some of these cards, be sure to let us know what your opinions are. If you've been able to put any of these cards to just spectacular use, anecdotes are always fun. So, as always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time when we go ahead and discuss the Spirit Sphere.
Later.